I know, I've read the comment a million times. I know that you haven't missed any of these super duper tiny details in Spider-Man movies. You're a real trooper, gold star, best nerd around. But for those in the back, the normies, the non-irradiated amongst you, here's a bunch of tiny details you missed in Spider-Man movies. Maybe. I don't know. Okay, this first one is just me getting a minor annoyance off my chest. The way that Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man as portrayed by one Andrew Garfield in No Way Home, just kind of goes along with the great responsibility moment. You know the one, the two Spider-Men have just met up with Spider-Boy over here and he's all like, "I'm a decimate, I'm a smash that goblin." And when he mentions how Aunt May said something about great responsibility, and Bully Maguire is all like, "Yo, my Uncle Ben said the same dang thing." And Andrew Garfield is just back there like, totes, dude, my Uncle Ben, he said, he said the exact same thing, winky emoji.
That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
I was immediately taken back into the whole scuttlebutt of the time, because, you know, I'm an old man, I guess. When everybody was like, "What do you mean Martin Sheen ain't gonna say the thing? I will not stand for this." "Aren't you gonna say the thing, Martin Sheen?" Anyway, this tiny detail is that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is a poser. Now here's one a lot of you may have missed, at least in the moment. That right there, that's graffiti reading Ditko. DITKO, which is of course a nod to Spider-Man creator Steve Ditko. Now obviously this is just something added in as a gift to fans and the legacy of a great artist, but my headcanon is that, as the legend goes, Steve Ditko is still out there, spreading his name in the form of urban art. They say you can still hear him crying out, "Hey, that Ayn Rand sure thinks good." And hey, if you were curious, the hit Broadway show introduced in the Hawkeye series, Rogers the Musical, pops up in a blink and you'll miss it moment in Spider-Man No Way Home in the form of a billboard in the background as Peter and MJ are swinging through New York. Speaking strictly on story terms, if you're unfamiliar with Spidey's comic book outings, you may have not read One More Day, a story arc which some might call divisive, while others might just say kinda sucked. Basically, Aunt May is shot during an attack on Peter's life after his identity is revealed to the world in Civil War. He's then given various visions of men that wind up being versions of himself, as well as a mysterious red-headed girl. Turns out these visions were created by Mephisto, yes, the one we always mention is probably behind everything, that little devil, and in order to save Aunt May's life, all Pete has to do is give up his marriage. After a conversation with Mary Jane, it's decided to say yes, and before changing reality to suit the new status quo, Mephisto reveals that the little girl is actually the daughter Pete and MJ would have had if they hadn't agreed to their deal with the devil. It's a lot, but it did lead to some great stories in the Brand New Day arc and beyond. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Point is, while the two don't share the same central gimmick with baddies and other Spideys hopping over from other dimensions, it's clear that the ending and new status quo for Pete, that the story was a huge influence and, for most fans, a strong recycling of that oft-berated storyline. It's also worth noting that in No Way Home, when Doctor Strange smacks that smug little bastard's soul right out of his body, Pete appears to have little waves emitting from his noggin, a visualization of his spider sense as it's traditionally shown in the comics. Okay, let's be honest here. Since No Way Home doesn't hit streaming until March 22nd, I don't actually have a ton of footage from the film itself to work with. So let's take a trip down memory lane with some of the past films of the franchise, starting with Into the Spider-Verse. Okay, so since we just mentioned billboards, let's take a journey to Times Square. Burrito Peter here is transported to Earth 1610, and as he's getting tossed about and being out of sorts, we get a whole bunch of slightly off promotional billboards and junk to show that this is a different world to what he's used to. These include Hold Your Horses, a Seth Rogen vehicle that appears to feature him as a stoned horse jockey. Whatever Kitten Heels is supposed to be, From Dusk Till Shaun, the unmade sequel to Shaun of the Dead, which obviously got made here, those lucky loos, and Hi Hello, a variation on the John Mulaney Nick Kroll stage show and one-time Netflix special Oh Hello.
Bam! That says, baby!
During our quick explainer on Gwen Stacy's origin and how she wound up in Miles' universe, we get this glimpse of her Peter Parker, and you'll notice that he's got some scaly business happening right here. This is a reference to his small role in the Spider-Gwen comics, wherein Peter is bitten by the lizard and winds up transforming into, well, a lizard. During the big finale in Far From Home, when Peter and MJ finally mac out on the bridge and conveniently aren't photographed by a dozen paparazzi, this license plate shows up. It's a clear reference to the Amazing Spider-Man 143, wherein Pete first kisses MJ. Now, it's maybe a little cheap to include another direct comic book reference from Far From Home, specifically in this case, a reference that actually only appears in the trailer, that doesn't even appear in the final film, but I just gotta mention it because it looks so cheap. Look at this thing. Like, you can't tell me this wasn't some dude in post-production just slapping ASM 212 in at the last minute. Also, the difference between TASM and ASM is astronomical if you're Googling the two. Anyway, Amazing Spider-Man 212 is notable for being the first appearance of Hydro Man. Now, this works well with the scene on account of this gun actually an illusion created by Mysterio and his group of Stark ex-employees, who was thought by some to be Hydro Man in the lead up to the film. Obviously, this was intentional and a nice way of sneaking in the character without having to actually, use the character. That said, the film does name drop Hydro Man's identity, Morris Bench.
There's a sailor named Morris Bench who was exposed to an experimental underwater generator and got hydro powers.
Yeah, you should definitely believe everything you read on the internet.
All right, here's one I know the comic fans recognize, but I decided to include because, well, it's my favorite part of Spider-Man Homecoming. When Pete is trapped under the rubble, courtesy of Beetlejuice over here, his struggle and the general look of the scene are strikingly reminiscent of a similar situation in Amazing Spider-Man number 33, in which he's trapped by Doc Ock in a flooding lab under some really heavy sciencey nonsense. Also in Homecoming, there's a mural scene here that includes the one and only Howard Stark, which makes sense. After all, he's the scientist version of Walt Disney in the MCU, so you'd expect references to him all over schools worldwide. Speaking of which, there's also this itty-bitty picture of Bruce Banner, among other real-life historically significant scientists. Now back to the OG. You ever notice that when we first meet Peter Parker in Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man, that he's wearing a shirt with red, blue, and white, foreshadowing the super threads that he'd be wearing later in the film? Speaking of them sweet threads, in the Thanksgiving scene, Norman Osborn is wearing Spider-Man's colors while Peter is wearing Green Goblin's colors, sort of showing them kind of putting aside their differences without actually realizing it so they can enjoy a meal together or something, the beauty of the holidays that bring us together. I don't know. Point is that it's a fun detail. Harry, meanwhile, is wearing a mix of both, potentially symbolizing his mixed allegiances. Oh, also, Harry earlier mentions that his dad prefers black dresses instead of this flowery garbage, and so in this scene, Mary Jane wears black. And later on, at Norman's funeral, everyone remembers to wear Norman's favorite color. So, that's sweet. Speaking of Willem Dafoe's absolute banger of a performance, did you ever notice that his teeth changed between when he's playing normal Normie and Gobby Normie? Anytime it's just Norman, he's wearing fake teeth that appear more perfect, while in Goblin mode, it's just Willem Dafoe's normal, somewhat imperfect teeth. Which, no shame on that, by the way. I have, the worst chompers around. I'm not shaming Willem Dafoe. I like his teeth, whether they're perfect teeth, normal teeth, whatever the hell was going on here. But thank you, David Lynch. That's quality. I'm getting real off topic. Anyway, the same trick was used in No Way Home, where of course we were graced with way less mask and way more of that quality Dafoe goodness. And he did his own stunts in both. Look, guys, I just really love Willem Dafoe. The Lighthouse should have been Best Picture. Just saying. Also in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man, future Venom Eddie Brock is introduced by name in the offices of the Daily Bugle.
Problem is, we don't have a decent picture. Eddie's been on it for weeks.
See, they said it. Last one from the O2 version, it's widely known that being a film that began shooting in New York City in January of 2001, it's not surprising that there were some shots featuring the World Trade Center. In fact, the original trailer specifically features the Twin Towers as a means to catch a helicopter full of bad guys, which, by the way, I saw that in theaters. That was tight as hell. Anyway, Obviously, this needed to be altered a bit after the events of 9/11, and so scenes were reshot, and in some instances, the towers were digitally erased from the final product. This also gives more context to the scene in which New Yorkers come together to fend off Green Goblin. Anyway, there is still one shot of the towers in Spider-Man at the end of the montage where we get that fantastic Lucy Lawless cameo, and just before we meet J. Jonah Jameson. Now, whether this is a mistake or just the filmmakers keeping in one instance as tribute is unknown, but it is worth noting that the shot is the same one used in the teaser trailer when Spidey looks up at the towers. I don't actually know if it's unknown. I didn't do research past a certain point. I Googled it, but I couldn't remember. And I don't think it's ever been confirmed or not. It doesn't matter. Spider-Man 2 notably introduces Mr. Ditkovich, a character who I was a little bummed didn't show up to rent a crappy apartment to Peter Parker at the end of No Way Home.
Give me rent. You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door.
By the way, okay, this is very tangential, but just real quick. The question of how Pete is able to afford the apartment in New York bugged me at first, but as some people who have actually had the time to watch it again have noted, the landlord specifically says that the rent is due first of the month. Still, kind of suspect that he's not, asked to, like, seemingly provide anything up front. Not that it really matters, it's a movie, but just thought I'd mention it because peeps have brought it up. Also, who knows, maybe he was working the streets. Anyway, the point is that Mr. Ditkovich is a reference to Steve Ditko, making him the reigning champ of Ditko Easter eggs. You know that guy who Pete meets in the elevator and they have that awkward, funny moment together? Okay, so that's actor Hal Sparks, who at the time was starring in the TV series Queer as Folk as Michael Novotny, a character with a love of comics who even winds up owning a comic book store called Buzzy's Comics, which he had often visited as a child. Michael went on to create the gay superhero Rage. Spoilers for Queer as Folk, by the way. Whoops. In Spider-Man 3, in the state-mandated funeral sequence, we get a cameo from Flash Thompson himself, Joe Manganiello. While the two don't seem to interact much in the first film, in the comics, Flash and Harry are friends early on. Whether or not this is a reference to that, or just that they, the production could get Joe Manganiello for a day, who knows? But, look at him. There, being sad. It's a sad werewolf. Anyway, there's a lot about Venom in Spider-Man 3 that, isn't very good.
If you know what I'm talking about.
But one detail that Raimi and company got right was how Venom doesn't trigger Pete's spider sense. See? Doesn't do it. Sneaks right up on that little bastard. In The Amazing Spider-Man, did you ever notice that after Pete's bitten by that there radioactive rave spider, when he's on the subway we get a brief shot of the Spidey logo on his skateboard? Y'all, this ain't your grandpa Spider-Man. This Spider-Man shreds. Oh, and this little guy right here, that's Michael Papajohn, most notable for shooting Uncle Ben in Spider-Man before being retconned in Spider-Man 3 as the guy who surprised Flint Marko into accidentally shooting Uncle Ben. It's so dumb. Anyway, in this Amazing Spider-Man 2, in the midst of a barrage of universe setup that won't come to pass, or will it, we get an easy-to-miss reference to Dr. Michael Morbius in all them schwanky table files that Harry Osborn gains access to after his dad croaks. Or does he? Speaking of which, did you notice that look, I'm going to go on my soapbox. I'm going to be like J. Jonah Jameson in No Way Home. You know what I'm saying? With the conspiracy. Anyway, you ever notice the cryo-tank being wheeled around after Norman dies? It's easy to miss, and you might have been distracted by the green laser over Norman's body, but if you take a look at some leaked concept art, it turns out that one of the Sinister Six display cases at the end was originally meant to contain Norman's cryogenically frozen head as a setup for his return in future movies, presumably that scrapped Sinister Six movie. Do you guys remember when we were inundated day in, day out with news about new Sony Spider-Verse movies? And oh wait, and finally, I don't know. There's so many Easter eggs in Amazing Spider-Man 2. See Electro's cake. Them's the Electro colors from the comics. How did he not have the necessary spandex suit on standby with this kind of foresight? Oh, also, just circling back around to No Way Home, whenever Electro sans blueness is doing his electrical thing, you will notice that he has electricity emitting from his noggin in the same shape as his classic mask within the comic book. So that's cool. These have been details you might not have noticed. By the way, did anyone else read the Spider-Man novels back in the day that featured the Gentleman, aka Gustav Frears? Y'all, there's a scene in one of those where the Vulture, if memory serves, he straight up cuts a chick in half. They are awesome. They're so rad. Anyway, if anything makes me wish we got more TASM movies, it was that their childhood memory. Love the Gentleman.